Okay, awesome. So welcome everyone to Equidox. Can someone just confirm that you can see my screen and the mouse moving?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So welcome everyone to Equidox. I'm actually in your account right now. So the handful of you that are set as administrators, you might see the documents that I import today. But for most of you, when you log in for your very first time, you're going to be set up as a standard user. So what you'll see is probably just a blank slate. So you won't see the documents that we're going to use today as part of the training. So if you log in and it looks a little bit different like on this main page here, don't worry. It's just because you're a standard user and you're only going to see the documents that you have personally imported or documents that are intentionally shared with you by another user. So I'll cover some of that in just a moment. First things first, I always mention with Equidox that it is a browser-based application, and we do recommend that you use Google Chrome if you have a choice of which browser to use. It's because Equidox is hosted on the Google Cloud platform, and some of the components of the architecture with the application are native to the Google sort of infrastructure, and so they're kind of optimized to work best with Chrome. So if you have a choice of which browser you can use, try to use Chrome. I would say the second choice would be Microsoft Edge, but again, if you have the option, use Chrome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get started by importing some documents. So pretending that I'm just logging in for the first time and I'm ready to get started. The two documents that we see sitting right here, these were just documents that I used a few weeks back when we did sort of an administrator pre-training just to talk about like user management stuff. So we're going to actually get into the mechanics of how to remediate documents today using Equidox. But what I first want to do is import some files to work on. So if I go to the Import Documents tab here on the left-hand side, that will bring me to this view. I can either click to open the folders on my hard drive, or I can also, if I have my folders already open, I can just select some files that I want to use and then just do a drag and drop to upload those documents. Once those check marks disappear, that just indicates that the files have uploaded to the cloud. This blue import button is now available. When I press the import button, this is going to start an automated process where Equidox is going to begin to evaluate these files for things like existing tag structure. So if the document were previously tagged at some point in its life cycle, Equidox will import those tags and give you the option to kind of make some adjustments, or in some cases, you might prefer to just start over from scratch. It's always case by case with PDFs. You don't always have control over where these things came from or how old they are or what happened over the course of that document's life cycle. Sometimes you're just you're kind of forced to make a choice. Is it worth trying to update what's here, or is it better to just start over with a kind of a blank slate using the automation inside of Equidox? And then alternatively, a lot of documents won't have tags at all, so you're probably importing a lot of documents that are completely tagless. And if that's the case, during the import, Equidox is automatically detecting the elements like encoded text, images, hyperlinks, fillable form fields, even pages that might require optical character recognition. So if you have like scanned pages, for example. Now, if I look here across like the main document, recent document list here, I can see those are the 5 files that I just imported. All of your documents will begin to populate down below. So you can always go back and like find documents that are older, things that you might have imported weeks or months ago. But your 5 most recent documents will appear across the top, the 5 that you've just most recently interacted with. There are some basic filter and search features down here throughout your document list. They're relatively self-explanatory. I mean, it's just, basic filtering by like title of the document or the owner or labeling system, which we can kind of cover briefly in a little bit. But they're pretty self-explanatory search features. In general, though, I find that most people are like importing a handful of documents. They're working on them. Those 5 documents are going to be sitting up at the top of your list, and you can kind of, get through them, export them, and then move on to other projects. That's kind of like the ideal way to use Equidox. So now that I've got these documents in here and we're ready to get started with some remediation, what I'll do is I'll click on the thumbnail here for this document. This is a very simple document on its face. I promise it takes me about 30 seconds at the most to remediate it using Equidox, but there's a lot of stuff that is kind of universal about this document. So things that we talk about with this PDF are really applicable to virtually every document you'll ever work on using Equidox. So there's plenty to talk about just within these 2 pages that will be applied to everything that you do moving forward. Okay, so when I clicked on that thumbnail, I'm now at the document detail page, and here I can see the file name right up here. I have a search feature that I'm able to filter, or I'm able to search for a specific page. So it's not super valuable in this case because I only have 2 pages, and I could just click on either thumbnail and go directly to those pages. But if you have a 200 pager and you know that you need to get to like page 173, you can just type in that number into this field and it will take you to that page. You don't have to scroll through hundreds of pages. I have a button to directly export this back to a PDF. I won't press that right now because I haven't done anything to it yet. I can also share the document. So if I wanted to ask other people to help me with this file for whatever reason, I can. Keep in mind that Equidox is collaborative. So you don't have to install anything on your computer. It's all web-based. You can have people that are in totally different locations working on the same document, even simultaneously. So if you had like a super high priority big document, maybe it's 200 pages, maybe 4 of your best remediators each take a 50-page section of it, and you can get through it in 25% of the time versus one person having to, clear their calendar and kind of panic all day as they try to rush through pages. So just keep that in mind that you can share the document with other users or other groups of users. So groups is another thing that's kind of up to the administrators to establish. I can, of course, delete the document, but I won't do that right now. I'm not going to remove anything out of Equidox. I'm just going to leave this alone. But if you ever needed to take something out of Equidox just to clean things up, maybe you want to minimize the amount of documents that you're storing inside of it, you can delete things at your leisure. There's no maximum number of documents though, so don't worry if you're like importing documents for a year straight. They can live inside of Equidox. It's not a problem. You can always just keep them there and revert back to them at a later date. Down below, you'll see some basic properties of the document. One thing I want to call out, because this is something that's so often overlooked, especially by people that might be new to accessibility, the document title. So if you notice, the document title that's been set here is the exact same as the file name. So what happens is many times when people are creating documents, they don't remember or they don't know that they're supposed to set a document title. And if you don't have a document title, it's an automatic failure for accessibility. Virtually every accessibility checker in the world will flag a document that doesn't have a title for being inaccessible. So Equidox knows this, and in an effort to avoid you falling into that trap, at the very least, it's going to take the file name and it's going to plug it into the document title field for you. So this is only for documents that don't already have a title set, which I would say is probably 90% of them. From my experience. Now, you're not limited though to this title. You can always update and enhance it. So I always mention this because a lot of times I see file names that have a really crazy naming convention. They'll be using serial numbers and acronyms and things that don't really make any sense, especially when hearing it read through a screen reader. So you can always just update your document title, making sure that you're putting like spaces between words. You don't need the .pdf file extension at the end. You can always clean up your title to just make it something that's clean and clear and descriptive of what the content of the document is. An author is optional. You don't have to add an author if you don't want, but it is something that you can do. And then also the English language attribute is going to automatically be set for you. Now you can also set other language attributes, of course. It just depends on the document. So if you have like a Spanish document for a Spanish class, or maybe, an information packet for foreign exchange students or something like that, you can set the language attribute to match the language of the document. This will trigger the screen reader to read from the correct library of words so that it will read a French or a Spanish or a Mandarin Chinese document with the correct cadence. It'll then be able to pronounce all of the words correctly. By default, it's set to English, so you don't have to worry about it in the majority of cases. But anytime you leave the English language, you can always just hit the drop-down menu and find the appropriate language. If you make changes to your properties, either like the title or the language attribute, just make sure you hit the save button. Okay, so let's jump into page one and we'll kind of walk through the interface a little bit and kind of talk about what some of the buttons do. And then we'll get into the remediation of this page. So when I arrive in the remediation page, there's kind of a lot going on. And if this is the first time you've seen this, which I think it is for the majority of you, it can be a little bit intimidating. So there's a lot of buttons here. So I'll walk through what these buttons do. But the first thing that I notice when I look here at the remediation page are these yellow rectangles that are kind of covering up the content. These yellow rectangles are what we refer to as reading zones. And reading zones are essentially the same thing as tags. So if you're coming from an Adobe Acrobat background, which I assume that you've had at least some experience or exposure to that sort of concept of tagging PDFs, these reading zones really act the same way. These are what's going to establish the tag structure when you export the document back to a PDF. So we're here to use these reading zones to organize the content to make sure that everything on this page is read in a logical way that's going to be compatible with assistive technology, primarily like a screen reader. So we need to make changes to the various reading zones on the page if there's changes that are required. So we'll get into kind of what some of those changes are in just a moment. Before we start making edits and changes to this page, I'm just going to run through kind of the interface and what some of the buttons do. Now, on the left-hand side, you have your kind of main workspace, and this is where you'll do like, the majority of your manipulation. There are two separate tabs. One is for the page tab. So the page tab allows you to make changes to the document at the page level. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have a document that you have some zones on the page, but you're not really impressed with what you've got. Maybe the existing tag structure just looks like a big, tangled mess, or maybe the initial detection that Equidox has given you is just not quite right. You have this little slider here called the zone detector, where if you move this back and forth, you'll notice how Equidox kind of redetects the granularity of the zones on the page. So as you bring it more to the left, it kind of gets more zoomed in. As you bring it back to the right, it kind of zooms out a bit more. So you just have different options as a starting point. It's a good way of it's a good place to start if you don't like the initial detection level that you've been given, or if you don't like the existing tag structure. You can kind of reset things with the zone detector. What's nice about using the zone detector from the page tab is that you can apply it to all pages. Now, this is handy if you have a document that is maybe a bit longer and it's kind of got a templatized formatting. So you're using the same fonts and color schemes and like general layout structures throughout the document. If you apply it to all pages, it will set that detection level for you across all pages. And then in theory, you won't need to revisit this slider. If you have an outlier page or two, you can always adjust it. But it should do the, correctly set the sensitivity for the majority of pages if it's that type of document where it's kind of consistent. The zone detection slider is also available up here, just so you're aware. So we just recently put out a new user interface, and part of that was to make the interface more accessible to people that use keyboard to navigate. So we've put a lot of the commonly used buttons up across the top. So the sensitivity slider is kind of duplicated in both locations. So it's always there for kind of easy access. Down below, you have the reading order option. And again, that's also duplicated up at the top. So with the reading order, Equidox, the default assumption, it's going to be a one-column reading order. And all that means is that we're going to set the reading order left to right, top to bottom. So as Equidox scans the page, it's going to find every single reading zone, and wherever it finds a new reading zone, it's going to place that next in the sequence. So that can always be adjusted, though. You have 4 different column options. So this is if you need to reorder things at the page level. You can also reorder things in different ways, like for individual zones or even a multi-select of zones. You can do kind of like group zones together to reorder them. We'll get into that later. But in general, your reading order for the full page, you can either choose 1, 2, 3, or 4 columns, and that should, in theory, give you a really good starting point depending on the layout of the page. So by default, it will be 1 column, but again, you can apply it to all pages. If you have, let's say, a 3-column article that's 20 pages long, If you choose 3 columns, you can then hit apply to all pages, and then Equidox will set it for you for all of the different pages in the document. Now, over on the right-hand side, in collapsed, it's really just a thumbnail of the pages in the document. So if you need to like scroll around and jump to a different page, you can always you can find that. But if I typically just leave that collapsed. Now, if I click on a specific zone, you'll notice that the zones tab is now populated. So there's the page tab and then there's the zones tab. And when I clicked on that zone, a bunch of new menu items just appeared right here. Now, these menu items are duplicated, so they're also available on the left-hand side, much like these buttons are available on the page tab. But part of, again, the interface redesign was to put the commonly used features up at that top menu because it's easier to access through a keyboard. But these are kind of duplicates. So as a mouse user, in general, what I do is I just hit this toggle switch to eliminate that second layer of the menu, because to me, I just visually like the way that it looks better this way. And it also just gives you some additional vertical space on your screen. So if you're using like a wide monitor, I like to have as much, vertical space as I possibly can. It's all a preference though, so you can toggle that on and off with this little toggle switch. Now, when you click on a specific zone, you can interact with all of the properties of it. Right now, all of the zones on the page are set to text zones by default because this is all just text as far as a machine is concerned. There was no tag structure to begin with. So we're going to go through some processes to kind of clean this up and make sure that all of this is set up properly for a screen reader user. Now, the buttons up at the top here, just to quickly run through them, there is an undo and a redo button. If you have an undoable action, then you can hit the undo button and it'll like reset things for you to whatever it was before. The redo button will like revert back. So it's kind of like you can go in both directions. So if you smash the undo button 10 times and you only meant to hit it 9 times, you can just hit the forward button when that populates. I don't really use these too often, but they are like nice to have and not need rather than need and not have. So don't rely too exclusively on them, but they're there if you need them. This little circle with the half moon, this is not like a critical function for the purposes of training today, but the little green flags in the upper left and right hand corner of each zone, that's called the zone info. It's just the type of zone you're dealing with, and then also the reading order of the zone. You can turn those on and off depending on your preference. I, in general, leave them both on, but sometimes you're dealing with a really like tightly spaced page, and the little green flags can just become like an eyesore. If you've got, 150 zones on a single page, it can be a lot to look at. So you can turn them off if you'd like. There is a save button. So if you're halfway through a page and you want to save your progress, you can. You also save when you toggle between pages. So on the left-hand side over here, there are arrows to take you from page to page, and it will prompt you to save your work as you go. So being a browser-based application, even if your Google Chrome does like a forced update on you or your laptop battery dies, you're never going to lose your progress. You're saving at the page level. So no more of like Adobe Acrobat crashing and 4 hours of work just being like, thrown away. Which happens all the time. This check mark right here, this is a nice tool, especially when you're collaborating on larger documents with other people. When you hit this check mark, it marks the page as validated. So it just indicates to other users that this page is done. So if you're back at the main document list, you can see that, okay, 1 of 2 pages are complete here. And there's actually a toggle switch. If you flick it to the right, it'll only show you the pages that are yet to be complete. So again, if you're collaborating and working together and you're like maybe leapfrogging around in the document where you're doing 20 pages in the morning and then someone else logs in and they do 17 pages and then you have time in the afternoon to do 30 more, instead of having to like try to figure out where the last person left off, you can always be aware of that by using the check mark here. So you can see exactly where people left off in the process. There are zoom in and zoom out buttons, which I was just pressing. So those are pretty self-explanatory. It's just all a preference on what you like to look at, depending on the page. So you can zoom in and zoom out. There is this lowercase I icon. So this is a menu of keyboard shortcuts. Don't worry about memorizing these, but this is just a menu if you'd like to look at them. Now, Again, this is more speaking to the accessibility of the application itself, but as a mouse user, I can still use those shortcuts to kind of pick up the pace. It's just less mouse movement, less clicking around, less drop-down menus that you have to deal with, that type of thing. So they will become second nature after a while. There's probably about a dozen or so that I use just without even thinking about it, and I'll let you know when I'm using them today during the training. There's also this X that will close out of the page and bring you back to the document detail page. So pretty self-explanatory. If you close out, it'll bring you back to where we started. Okay, and then the button that I skipped over here, it's the most important one up here. It's this preview button. Now, when you press this preview button, it's going to open up an HTML preview of the page that you're currently working on. So this HTML preview is just a simple linear rendering of how this page is going to be read if you were to stop working and export the document right now. If you've looked at the tag structures in Adobe Acrobat, you know how complicated it can get. It's very technical, very tedious. You have to have a lot of training and sort of like, prerequisite skills to be able to interpret it. But HTML is very simple. It's just what you see is what you get. So this is a reflection of the reading order. If we have headings, if we have tables, if we have lists, if we have hyperlinks, all of these different elements are going to populate in our HTML preview. So essentially what you're doing as a remediator is to make sure that your HTML structure sort of matches up with the structure of the PDF and how you would visually read this document if you were going through it. So you just want to build that equivalent experience for a blind person that's using a screen reader who isn't visually able to see the reading order of the page, or they're not able to understand that there's a table there, that type of thing. You need to make sure that you're setting up the structures on your from your PDF through that HTML preview. Now, in terms of making changes to this, I'm going to get into some of those changes, but this feels like a pretty good spot to pause because I've been rambling on for like 20 minutes now. I want to make sure that everyone's following along. If there's any questions, this is a good time to ask, and then we'll get into the actual remediation of this page.
Dan, we have a couple questions in the chat. The first question asks, does it automatically import the correct language if the original file had the language set correctly, assuming that it is a non-English language?
I believe it will always default back to English, unfortunately. It would be, that's just kind of how Equidox is programmed. That would be unusual. I mean, I don't usually see documents going into Equidox that have the correct language attribute set. So if it's like already a properly tagged document and it already has the correct language attribute, it would be unusual for you to be even importing it into Equidox. But I think if you have a one-off example of that, you might have to reset it to the appropriate language. I don't believe we import that property, but that is a good question. That's actually not something I've been asked before.
Awesome. And then our second question is, does the standard keyboard shortcuts like Control-Z work for the undo and redo?
The undo and redo, I don't know if we have keyboard shortcuts for those. We do not have the undo. Actually, the undo button is kind of a newer feature, and I don't think we've programmed a keyboard shortcut into the interface for that. And it's because we've kind of used the shortcuts for our keyboard only users, and it is very easily accessed through their tab key in this top menu. I don't believe we have a shortcut built for the undo and redo button. So sorry about that. Unfortunately, no.
That is all good. Are there any other questions that anyone else has? Feel free to unmute yourself or type them in the chat. I think we are good, Dan.
Okay, perfect. So let's start making some changes to this page. There's not a whole lot that we really have to do. And like I said, if we were going at full speed, this would have been a long, we would have been done with this document for a long time. So forgive my long-windedness. I'm just talking through a lot of navigation and basics and stuff like that. So with this document, as we know, there's no existing tag structure. Nothing came in with this document except the fact that Equidox sees that there is text on this page. And that's why it's drawn these reading zones for us. But by default, all of these reading zones are just set as text zones. So you can see everything in the upper left-hand corner says TX, and everything in the upper right-hand corner has a number indicating the reading order. Now, we need to change our headings on this page. So if you're not familiar with the way that heading structure works, you're basically building an outline of the document for a keyboard-only user to be able to navigate through the tag structure and find a specific section that they're looking for. So just as you would scroll through a document or flip through a document, just visually looking at it, a screen reader user needs to be able to navigate a specific section or subsection within the content. So if I were a screen reader user and I wanted to just read this paragraph, I would be able to navigate through the headings to find that specific section and then read the corresponding information. Without any heading structure, that becomes impossible because they wouldn't know where to begin or where to stop. They would just have to read through everything to eventually hear what they were looking for. And on a simple 2-page document like this, sure, it's not that big of a deal. But what if it's a 500-page textbook and what they're looking for starts on page 451? Well, how are they to find it without heading structure? That's why this is a very critical step in what we're doing. So heading structure is kind of one of the pillars of PDF accessibility. Provides that main navigation tool for a screen reader user. So what we'll do to set our headings is I'm going to click here on this element, which is my heading level 1 for the document. And over here underneath the properties, it says type, and the type is text. So you can hit this drop-down menu and you can like scroll down to find heading and change it to a heading. But I actually prefer to use my keyboard shortcuts. So when I want to set a heading level 1, instead of messing around with drop-down menus, I simply tap 1 on my keyboard, and it instantly becomes a heading level 1. I can then set these elements as heading level 2s because these are subheadings of this H1. So I'm going to set these as H2s by just tapping 2 on my keyboard. And if I were to then return to the HTML preview, what I'll see is this visual change where I've got much larger fonts for where those headings have been identified. So the reason I like to do my headings first, once I've established my zone detection level, so like you set your sensitivity setting on like whatever you prefer, the first thing I like to then do is mess around with my headings and try to set those up. Because once you've got your headings identified, it really helps you kind of establish the reading order for the page. Because now when I look at this HTML preview, it's really obvious to me that I have a reading order issue. I never want to see back-to-back headings of the same level. This is technically illogical heading structure. You can have nested heading structure where you have an H1 directly followed by an H2, but you never want to have back-to-back H2s without any content in between. That doesn't make any logical sense. So the problem here is very simple. It's just that Equidox by default is assuming that your document is a 1-column reading order. So it's just reading left to right, top to bottom. So when it gets down here to this bottom half of the page, it sees that this is reading zone 5, this one is 6, then 7 and 8. I can very quickly correct this by simply hitting the drop-down menu, choosing 2 columns and pressing reorder. And it happens instantly, but now we have 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And if you go back to the preview, what you'll see is that change reflected here in your HTML, where every paragraph is now directly following their corresponding heading. The only other thing to talk about on a page like this, so it's kind of a misconception in the PDF world that all things on all PDF pages must be tagged at all times. It's not exactly true. You can have redundant elements or decorative elements, things that are really just providing like a speed bump to a screen reader user. So think of like, headers or footers or the revision dates, in the bottom margin of a page, like these types of things that recur, that are like recurring throughout the document are not offering any like unique information. And just the same as you wouldn't visually read it, your eyes would just kind of glance right past it if it's just like something in the margin. A screen reader user doesn't want to have that read to them on every page. So there is this concept in the PDF world called artifacting, and you can achieve that by simply clicking on a zone and hitting the remove zone button, or just hit backspace on your keyboard. So hitting backspace is the keyboard shortcut to artifact that element. So if I look at the HTML preview now, you'll see that it's no longer included. So the reading order for this page would start with my heading level 1 and then work through the rest of the content. So that's simple enough for like a short document. If you have like recurring elements in the margins, you can just click on them and hit backspace. But what about if we have a situation where, you've got a 200-page document and every single one of those pages has like the chapter title or the revision date or a serial number for office use, like in the margin of the page. You can easily forget to do it across half the pages, and then you've got like a very sort of inconsistent experience for an end user. If you click and drag to just create a new zone, and just make it intersect with that area of the page, you can change that zone either through the drop-down menu. You can change it to an ignore zone, or you can hit I on your keyboard, I for ignore. Now, what will happen here is, even though I have a text zone around that content, if I then go and look at the HTML preview, it's still not there. It's not included in the tagged reading order. But the nice thing about the ignore zone is that if I were to move on to the next page, without arriving at this page yet, the ignore zone is already there waiting for me. So it copies itself to all pages in the document so that you can artifact those things kind of just across the board without having to remember to like scroll to the bottom left corner and artifact by hitting backspace that little tiny zone. So it's a nice little trick to have up your sleeve for longer documents. In a real world setting, I would not use it on a 2-page document because I can just as easily click and hit backspace. But a couple of times, it's not really a big deal. But on long documents, it's a nice little trick to have. And you can create a better end user experience by using it because you're not making them read this redundant header across every page. One other thing is down here, we have this page number. Page numbers are actually, redundant in the PDF world. They can actually just cause confusion because this is not like anything other than just a screen reader reading one. But the screen reader user already knows that they're on the first of 2 pages in the PDF. That's just how the PDF is built. And then this number 1 could actually easily be conflated with this sequence of numbers at the end of this paragraph. So just having a screen reader read 1 out loud is rather confusing because they don't really know what it's in reference to. They would probably be able to figure it out in this very simple document, but rather than like leaving it up to, hoping that they're able to figure it out, in general, I recommend removing them or hitting, backspace to artifact or using that ignore zone trick. But just to show you a different mechanic here on what you can do, if I scroll down a little bit on the left-hand side, there is this area called zone source. And underneath zone source, there are 4 different squares. The main zone source is PDF, and all that means is that whatever is encoded into the document, we just put a tag around it. So that's like, in general, everything is a PDF zone source. What I'm going to do, though, is while I have that zone selected, I can just click on actual. And actual is a way that I can edit what is read by a screen reader when it arrives at this tag. So instead of it just reading 1, I can make it read something like page 1 of 2. So I'm actually adding some additional context to what that element is instead of just, leaving it up to the screen reader user to interpret it. Other ways that you might use actual text, think of like documents that are using a lot of acronyms. Acronyms are kind of the enemy of screen readers because, they are just read as words most of the time. So unless like someone is actually using actual text, let's say the acronym is like capital B, capital A, capital T. Well, a screen reader is just going to read BAT. So that blind user might be very confused, like, why is this document suddenly talking about like baseball or flying mammals? It's just like a very confusing sort of it's unclear as to why is like this word constantly being read in this document when it's not really like the topic at all. So what you can do is you can go into actual text and you can phonetically spell out like what that acronym is in reference to. So then you're overriding that tag to say, don't just read the letters BAT as the word bat, but phonetically spell out, what does that B stand for? What does that A stand for? What does that T stand for? And at least then, if you do it once, at least, you're like one iteration of it, they can then make that connection to go, oh, okay, like every time I hear the word bat, it's in reference to this acronym. So just like little things like that can make a really big difference for the end user, especially when you extrapolate it over the course of like dozens or hundreds of pages, where that one confusing acronym that keeps being brought up, they don't know what it actually is in reference to. So that can make a big difference. Or if you have like non-standard symbols, if you have like, think of like a restaurant menu that uses like a chili pepper to indicate that a dish is spicy, or a V with a circle around it to indicate that it's a vegan dish. Like that's great if you're sighted, but a screen reader doesn't know what to pronounce or read out loud when it gets across that symbol. So you can phonetically spell those things out so that that blind user has the same experience as they're reading the menu. So just little things like that can go a long way if you come across them. You're not going to have to do this on every document or every page. These are just kind of like the fringe examples, but there are like tricks and mechanics within Equidox to help you overcome them. One other thing about zone source, I can draw a zone that's not even touching anything. And if I call it a custom zone, I can actually add in a custom information about this page. And so there's nothing visually that's going to be altered about the document in any way. It's going to be like a little hidden message for a screen reader user. So think about things that, there's a red arrow pointing at a paragraph to emphasize that it's really important. Well, you can make sure that that's known by like leaving that little hidden message that, hey, the next element on this page is being emphasized by the author. It's got a red arrow pointing at it. You can like add that information in. Or if you have like a flow chart that has, multiple reading orders, you can make sure that you can return to that focal point of the flow chart by using a custom zone and then go down the other alternative reading order of that flow chart. So these are all, again, just like sort of abstract examples, sort of hypothetical situations, but the custom zone source and the actual text, they're really helpful in kind of working around documents where there's things that are being conveyed visually that don't have a text equivalent. So sometimes it's just the location of two things on the page, or the fact that they're color coding things on the page, that they're conveying information through that visual aspect. But a blind user, if they just read the text, they don't have that same experience. So you can enhance the document for them by using that custom zone source. Again, not things that you're going to have to do every day or on every document or on every page, but when you do come across them, these are important techniques to understand. So again, I know I threw a lot of like sort of dense information there at the end at you, but are there any questions about actual text or custom? Okay, great. So we will jump to page 2. And when I jump over here to page 2, what we will see is it's kind of more of the same. So it's a little bit of a review. So I'm just going to tap 2 on my keyboard to set my H2s. And then I get down here and I realize that, my H3, which is a subheading of this H2, is kind of consolidated inside of the same zone as its paragraph that goes with it. So that's kind of annoying. And I probably could have solved this by using the detection slider and giving myself like a better starting point. But I'm also able to just resize a zone and then click and drag to draw a new one. So if you need to make like, very small adjustments like that, you definitely can. You can resize the zone by just clicking in the lower right corner, and you can resize and move them around pretty straightforward. So this is now an H3, so I tap 3 on my keyboard. It's the same problem here. I just resize, tap 4 for my H4, and then draw a new zone. Now, if I go and check out my preview, things look pretty normal, but then suddenly I get down here and I realize like, well, why are my paragraphs at the very bottom of the reading order? The reason this happened is because I already had 12 zones on the page. So when I shrunk this zone down and drew new ones, this became reading zone 13 and this became 14. So my reading order is all messed up. It goes from 8 to 13, back to 9, then 14, then 10, then 11, then 12. I can solve all of this by just hitting the reorder button. And now it's all reordered appropriately, where if I go back to my preview, I can see that all of those paragraphs fall in line with their corresponding heading. But one little final check of this HTML preview, and I realized that, oops, I forgot to set an H4. I never clicked on that heading. It's not showing it up in bold font. So I can get that visual sort of confirmation that that's actually supposed to be an H4. So I tap 4 on my keyboard and it will fix it. If you're curious why I've put Japanese text into this document, like why the sudden change, well, for a simple reason, sometimes you have documents with mixed languages. So whatever the case may be, if you have a document with multiple languages present, we've set the parent language attribute for this document to English because the majority of it is in English. But then suddenly we have a tag that's now in Japanese. Well, of course, an English screen reader cannot read Japanese characters. So what I can do is I can click on this one tag where I suddenly have Japanese present, and I can come over here to the language drop-down menu. So the language drop-down menu, if I just hit J on my keyboard, it'll take me straight to Japanese. And now I can set Japanese as the language attribute for just this one tag. So assuming it's a bilingual person that's reading in both English and Japanese, and they have both languages installed on their screen reader, they'll be able to read all of these characters and have that information relayed to them. So I can save this page and close out of it, and it will bring me back to the document detail page. And now I can see both pages are done. I'm finished. And the final step here to kind of end things is to export the document. So if I click on the export tab, this will take me to this option here where I have either PDF, HTML, or EPUB. In general, I think you're going to be keeping things in your PDF format. So you imported a PDF. Most users want to get a PDF back from Equidox. You can also export to HTML or EPUB. So the choice is yours. Like if you want to convert something out of PDF into a different format, you can. Or if you want to provide it in multiple formats, depending on the use of the document, you certainly can do that as well. So that's what's nice is you remediate it once and you can produce 3 separate formats. But we'll focus on the PDF today. So if we just, the default setting is PDF, and all I have to do is hit generate PDF. When I hit generate PDF, it's going to produce a brand new document for me. And in this new document, for me, it opens up in my browser. I have this little like Adobe Reader installed on my browser. So this is where it opens up for me. You might have a different default reader on your machine, but this is mine. But now that I have this new document, you can see that it's the same document we started with. Nothing has changed about it. But if I were to download this, and I'll save this one to my desktop. And let's see here. If we open up the original, this one, the original document was completely untagged. So this would, of course, fail all things in the accessibility checker. Let's see. Start checking. Obviously, all of this just lights up with issue after issue. All of this is bad. So we get yelled at by Acrobat. That's no good. But if we go to the one that we just exported from Equidox, and we look at the tag structure, so this document is now fully tagged. So everything that we built and we checked in that HTML preview is reflected here. So you can see all of our heading level 2s, all of our P tags. Here's even that little custom information about the page. You can see that we've actually inserted that little hidden message for a screen reader user. All of that work that we did and kind of checked along the way using the preview is all available to us. And then this one will pass the accessibility checker, which might be a way that you're you're validating things kind of as like a final step. But other than these 2 warnings, which if you use Acrobat, you know that there's really no way to avoid these 2 things. These just come out with every document. They're just telling you that you need to manually check the reading order and the color contrast. But of course, we already checked the reading order. That's what we were using the preview for. So we know that we've done a good job. So that's kind of like the full life cycle of going from import to remediation to export to validation. So that's what you can expect as an average day of using Equidox. Of course, you'll be going a lot faster, but we're in a very slow-paced training mode right now. So any questions about this document at all? Anything that I can clarify before we jump into some other element types?
Yes. So Dan, we have one question regarding some of the stuff that you went over. And the question is if you have the same document and you want to include an element that's like A-B, but you don't want it to read as A minus B. Would you use a custom zone for that, or how would you address that?
Yeah, you could definitely use like actual text for something like that. So you would, let's say if we like copy this paragraph, I usually use the HTML preview. And then if I change this zone to actual, when I paste this in here, this is where you could add in your lorem dash ipsum, or you could type in like lorem dash. That wouldn't really be much of a difference for an end user. If it's like a hyphenated word, that's just like a standard symbol that screen readers know how to handle. So that would be up to like the individual user and the settings, like their verbosity settings on their screen reader, so they wouldn't be thrown off by a dash. But if you added in that lorem dash ipsum, or if you wanted to, say like, hi, here is my actual text. When you go back to your preview, it's going to update with everything that we just changed.
I think the original question was the difference between custom and actual, because her initial question had to do with like if somebody had A minus and they wanted it to be read as A minus instead of A, where the screen reader doesn't bother to read the dash, which type of zone would be used? And I had said actual potentially, but then she asked, well, what if in the same document that include another element like A dash B, and you want it to be not read as A minus B, but as A to B? Is that
Right.
custom zone then?
So you would use what you use actual for is to edit what is already there in terms of how it's read. When you use custom, it's when you're adding in something that doesn't exist at all. There's reasons why, like technical reasons. When you do an actual text update, let's just say hypothetically that you were in the future going to re-import this document to into Equidox. Equidox would remember the actual text that was added, whereas custom would not come back in if you were to in the future re-import this. That would be a 1 in a million type of random example, like use case that you probably are never going to encounter. But that's one reason why you would use actual for something like that. The functionality in terms of how it's relayed to a screen reader user, it's all the same because it's just a p tag in either example. It's just this one is used when you're adding in something that doesn't exist at all, whereas this is editing something that does exist.
What'd you do for A minus, Dan? Like for a grade, B minus, A minus, C minus, what would you use?
You could phonetically spell out the minus, but I think it's more of a what is the screen reader user used to hearing through their screen reader. So the dash is like a standard symbol. So if it reads A dash, then they're going to understand like, okay, this is a report card. It's an A minus. That's my grade. You could like, you're not going to hurt anything by typing in A minus, but it's more about the familiarity that a screen reader user has. Like as they use that screen reader every day, they have their settings kind of applied and how they would want to use it and how they would want certain symbols to be read. But being a standard symbol like a dash, it's, within the context of what the document is. If it's a report card and they hear A dash, they understand that that's an A minus.
Okay, so just remediating it and tagging it as normal. If the actual text is there in whatever capacity is kind of the standard route, and if it's not, then that's when you do the custom.
Yeah, the context of what the document is plays a big part, in how it's read and how it's interpreted through the screen reader. But the individual user that has their screen reader is, in general, they're an intelligent person that knows how to interpret these types of things for the most part. So when it's a report card with grades on it, they know that A plus equals, a great score. You don't necessarily have to spell out the plus or spell out the minus. It's kind of implied through the context of it being a report card.
Tiffany, are you saying when you're testing, like using Equidox to tag the document, when you're using a screen reader?
No, my testing has been on applications that our team has written to actually export grades. And we've found that in many cases, if you have a minus grade, the minus simply isn't read because the screen reader interprets it as a dash. So you'd have A and, 90%, A, 89%, because the 89% would be to the A minus, but the minus isn't read. So we actually had to encode minus the word in screen reader only text to make it interpreted correctly by a screen reader. Now, I don't often deal with PDFs, so I don't know if this would be the same issue in a PDF, but I do know that many instructors include grades in PDF documents, them being syllabi or graded papers. So
that's interesting. I mean, we could take that discussion offline. I would probably actually want to loop in one of our screen reader experts here that uses a screen reader on a regular basis to see if they have a different take on it than I do. But it's my understanding that the dash will be read by a screen reader unless the screen reader user has like a setting applied that they don't read hyphens or dashes. I'm curious though. Now, I'm just wondering, what screen readers that you're using to test. But I don't. Just in the interest of time, this is kind of an example that's probably not applicable to everyone else on the call, and we do have some other things that I want to cover. So we can take that discussion offline and talk through it, after the call.
We'll get back to you, Tiffany. I took a note down here. Dan, there's a few extra other questions here I want to get to, and I think, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, we are able to stay a little bit after. I know Dan's got some other stuff that we want to get through. We won't go too much after with the training of the full hour, but you want us to stick around past the 3 o'clock Eastern mark.
Yeah, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but we are recording, so anyone that has to jump for another meeting, you're more than welcome to, and you can always revert back and see the last few minutes of the recording to catch up on the other things that we're going to talk about.
I do want to get these other questions answered though if people do have to go. So Michael asked, I noticed an indentation attribute. Would you set that for page 2 of the document? Think of the
indentation attribute. I'm not. Oh, indentation. This would be for HTML purposes. So as I said, part of the export process of Equidox is being able to export to the HTML world. So if you wanted to make visual, sort of adjustments to how your HTML appears, if you wanted to be consistent with the PDF, for example, indenting something, you have that ability with this feature. But the vast majority of users are just keeping things in the PDF world. So this would not be applicable to making a visual alteration because we're not here to change the way that your PDF looks. The author chose to indent this in the PDF. That's just a visual element built into the document. So when you export it as a PDF, it's going to stay the same.
And then one other one here from Sarah. What is the process for editing the OCR?
Oh, okay, good question. So we can take a look at a document like this. We'll just use this really quickly. So the other zone source that we were looking at here. So when you if you draw a zone and place it on top of the image here, the other zone source is OCR. So let's say you've got this image of this thing that's just been inserted into the document here, but now there's this text that's just kind of locked inside of it. I don't really want to retype all of this as alt text. I'm probably going to misspell things and stuff like that. So if I go into the zone source, I can just click on OCR and I can press the convert to text button. When I press convert to text, it'll just take a couple seconds, but it will give you a text result. Now that I look at my result here, I have Grammarly installed on my browser. So it's yelling at me that pit houses is not a word, but it is as far as the author is concerned. And then it's telling me that agriculture is hyphenated, so I can clean that up. I can just edit the result inside of this. So you're able to change whatever the result is inside of this OCR. The OCR is very accurate when you're dealing with, a good quality scan. So in most cases, you won't really have to make too many changes, if any. But in the event that it's kind of a crooked document or it's, got a shadow from an old Xerox machine, Results may vary. It's always just up to what the OCR engine is capable of seeing. So you can edit that result inside of this text window. This is also expandable. So if you have like a huge paragraph, you can always make this larger.
I think that's it for now.
Okay. And while we have this document open, I'll just call something else out, that inside of the document detail page, you have this images tab. In this images tab, it's basically a consolidated list of all of the images in the document in one location. So if you are familiar with the document and you're comfortable kind of interpreting what these images are and how they need to be described, you can quickly kind of streamline your approach in writing the alt description for them. Or if it's like a STEM class and you have like a professor that needs a PDF remediated and you're not the subject matter expert, maybe it's a chemistry document that's got a bunch of crazy chemistry diagrams and you're not a chemistry student, they might provide you that alt text like in an alternative source, maybe a spreadsheet or something. And then you can just kind of quickly copy and paste the alt text to match up with the image. So you can kind of approach it in that way. Another clever way of using this images tab, not that this applies to all documents, but I do see a lot of documents where you have like a logo in the upper left-hand corner of every page. Now that can be very redundant. You don't want to have to remember to artifact it on every page, and you don't want to have to type out the same alt text of the same logo page after page. So what you can do is you can hit this hide all zones checkbox, and you can deselect the all visible checkbox. And what that does is it will artifact all of those images in one click. Now, it's not really it doesn't make sense to do that on this document, but hypothetically speaking, if this sort of National Park Service logo, that's this like tiny little logo up here in the right-hand corner, if this were the only image in the document and it repeated across, a 300-page long survey or a 300-page long report, you would be able to eliminate that across all of the pages. And then if you wanted to just keep it like on the first page, you can just reverse the check mark and you can type in your description as needed. If you make changes to your images, just make sure you hit the save button. There's a big save button here, and there's also a save button at the bottom of the list as well. So just remember to do that before you leave the page. And then of course you can, if you were to go into the specific document, here I've got my image up here that I left, and then I also just artifacted this one. All of the other images in the document would have been artifacted, but here I left this one specific image, and I can type in my National Park Services logo description right here into my description field, because sometimes you need to have the context of the image within the full page to understand how you want to describe it. So you can, of course, add in your description at the page level. I'm often asked about long description and title. Much like the indentation property, the long description and title, these are HTML only. So don't worry about these unless you're going to export it to HTML. There's really no place for these to go in the PDF world, but it's just, again, we support multiple formats. So even though the majority of our customers are using it for PDF exports exclusively, we still have, quite a few users that do export to HTML that want to have the ability to add long descriptions and titles to their image, but it's only a HTML property. Now, a couple of other things. So we do have, I'm going to jump into this document to talk about lists really quickly. So lists are kind of an important part of PDF accessibility, of course. List structures are very tedious to set up manually because you have to identify like a label and a list body and a list item, and you group it together, and then you nest it all inside of a list tag. It just takes a while to get through it. But with Equidox, it's really quite simple. Now, these lists, this document here is completely untagged. So there's nothing here to identify these as lists to a machine. So right now, Equidox just sees this as just like a block of text. And if you were to look at the HTML preview, you would see that evidence right here where I have just like this weird looking paragraph with bullet points. There's really no punctuation. So what we do to fix this is we simply click on the text zone and hit L on our keyboard. When you hit L on your keyboard, it will change it to a list for you. So it selected list for me, and it all automatically scrolled me down to the list detector. Now from the list detector, I can just nudge this slider from left to right, and it's automatically going to create a list for me. And if I go back to my preview, you'll see that instead of having like a strange little run-on sentence, I've actually got a list with 3 distinct list items. So Equidox will do the hard part of exporting the tags for you. All you have to do is identify it as a list and then nudge your slider from left to right. If you have a list like this, where you have like 1, 2, and 3 that are present, instead of just, standard bullet points as your list style, sometimes you'll have, Roman numerals or letters or numbers. It's the same process. Hit L on your keyboard and nudge your slider over to the second setting. So when I drop it over on the second setting, I'll explain this in just a second. It's kind of technical. But what we do now is we hit the ordered radio button. When you hit the ordered radio button, you get a drop-down menu that says style type. And if I hit the style type drop-down, I can now change this to a different style. So this is a numbered list. So I want to hit numbers. And instead of having just bullet points being assigned to the list items, I have numbers like 1, 2, and 3. Now this is really more for the HTML aesthetics. We're not visually altering your PDF. So it's not really making that big of a difference for a PDF export. But if you want your HTML to kind of match the style of the PDF, you can see that instead of having just standard bullet points assigned, you've now assigned the list labels as numbers to match this document. And then finally, we have a nested list here. Now, nested lists are very difficult, much more complicated than just a standard list. But in Equidox, it's really the same thing. You just hit L on your keyboard. And again, move your slider over to at least the second setting. And this little wheel that's spinning, it's just indicating that it's using the computer vision and machine learning. So we're using a form of artificial intelligence that has been trained to figure out what nested lists look like. So instead of just having 2 main items, it actually finds that there's a layer inside of those list items of another list. So with just a couple of seconds, you can build nested list tag structure. So that's list. That's just a quick crash course through lists. If all else fails, if for whatever reason your list is just like really weird and goofy, you can draw a zone, hit L, and then say, okay, this list has 6 items. And then you can drag these things around and kind of place them wherever they need to go. I would say I need to do this less than 1% of the time. But if you ever need to manipulate things, you can do it manually. Okay. Let's back out of this document. I want to talk about tables as kind of a final thing here. Tables are, really an important part of PDF accessibility, but they are quite a burden from a tagging perspective for most people that are using, the primitive tools like Adobe Acrobat. So if I click here on the thumbnail for page 6, it's going to take me to this page. And well, if I take a look at this page, it's pretty scary looking. Got a bunch of these little tiny zones for like each data cell. And if I were to go to the HTML preview just to kind of see like where I'm at, you can easily put yourself in the shoes of a blind person who would have this table read to them like this. It's just a bunch of nonsense, completely useless to just leave this whole page in this type of format. So what I do as a remediator is I'm going to draw a zone around the entire table. So when I put a zone over all of this, I can ignore the existing zones underneath. I'm not worried about those. I can then hit T on my keyboard, or you can again use the drop-down menu if you'd like for table. You can then either click on the table editor button, or you can just double click on the zone that you created. Either one will work. It'll take you to the table editor. And when you're in the table editor, you will notice these green grid lines. The green grid lines, they're kind of out of place right now. You can manipulate them and drag them around, but that's not very fun. And, it'd be pretty tedious because there's a lot of data cells in this table. So what we have are these table detector sliders. So for columns and rows, if you just nudge these sliders from left to right, it wakes up the artificial intelligence. So it's going to just kind of reestablish where those grid lines go. And now all of my green grid lines are in perfect alignment with my table cells. So as you know, you don't have to do this, but you can see all of the cells are nicely defined. And with just that quick change of, nudging the sliders around, if I go back to my preview, you can see what a dramatic difference we've made from whatever this big monstrosity is of data. So we've actually built a real table now. So we've got some, basic table structure established. There's a couple of other things though that we have to address with this table. Primarily the fact that like level 1 at the top, it's kind of like split into 2 cells and then it's flanked by empty cells on either side. We need to make sure that we're spanning across all of these different columns because level 1 kind of straddles these 6 different columns. So what I do to span is I click in the cell where I want the span to begin, and then I will hold shift on my keyboard. So the shift key on your keyboard, and then select where you want the span to end. That will then select all of these cells for me. So they all kind of like turn purple. And then this arrow button appears. So this is the span button, or you can also just press S on your keyboard. Either one will work. And if you then go back to your preview, you will see that level 1 now spans across all 6 of those columns. One other thing that we have to address with this table is the fact that the second row here, these are also table headers. So right now, by default, Equidox assumes that your table has a single column header and a single row header. So that's just the average kind of run-of-the-mill table where you have table data, a header for each of your columns and rows. But in this case here, we have 2 levels of column headers. So not only is it the specific level, like level 1, level 2, level 3, but then you have a subheading level as well. So all we do is over here on the left-hand side where it says column and row header, they're at the default 1-to-1 ratio. If you just hit the up arrow, changing it from 1 to 2, you will then go back to your preview and you'll see that you have bold font for that top 2 row section, indicating that both of these are going to be tagged as headers. So if you're in this particular cell as a screen reader user, you know that you are specifically in the mobile device row. You know that it's level 1, and then more specifically, it's the SSN column. So they're able to freely navigate this table data and always understand their relationships with their various column and row headers. Table summaries are not required, but you have this checkbox here that says auto summarize. You can hit that checkbox and Equidox will give you a table summary programmatically. It's not really a compliance requirement. And for simple tables, table summaries are pretty much just obsolete for modern screen readers, but something you can provide with a checkbox there. Just hit it and it will fill it in for you. You can always add or enhance this table summary. Like if you're using, I saw a table the other day that was using stars, like these totally like non-standard symbols, stars that were like indicating how highly rated these like mutual funds were for an investment portfolio. So it's like 5 stars, 4 stars, 3.5 stars. That's great if you can see the stars, but a screen reader user doesn't know what those are. So you can go in and like indicate that, okay, in the 4th column, there's a bunch of stars. And depending on how many of those little symbols there are, each one of those symbols equates to a specific number of stars. So you can make like that sort of, enhancement through the table summary. You can also go into a specific cell. And much like you have that actual text or the custom feature, you can enhance it by like typing in something that doesn't exist. So like here's a custom cell edit. Not that you're going to need to do this very often, but if something is like, using like a visual cue, you can add in something that's not there, like putting in real words that can then be read by a screen reader. You can add and split rows, like deleting a row with these buttons. You can hit R and D. You can create new columns and hit remove columns. So that's C and M for your keyboard shortcuts. And you also have the ability to nudge your columns or nudge your rows. You won't need to do this very often at all, but just in case you do, instead of clicking on 50 rows and moving them up just like 2 pixels, you can nudge them and they all move together in unison. Again, that's very rare. If you have like a super tightly spaced table, maybe you have to do it from time to time, like size 6 font with 90 rows in the table. Like those types of things can be like super, super tight. So like you can nudge things so that you don't have to click on all of them individually. But if I save the table and close out, when I return to the PDF, all of those like million little zones that I had before, they have been overridden as one single table zone. Okay, so with that said, I know that we're like 15 minutes over, and you had some great questions, and we'll get back to you on those. Are there any more questions? Again, I have some more time to stay in chat if you have any other questions. I just want to make sure that we get through the basics so that everyone's comfortable kind of navigating the tool. The best way to learn Equidox is really to get your hands on it and do some of this work yourself. I can talk about all these different things and hypothetical situations to do to these documents, but until you start doing it yourself, that's when it will really start to sink in and click for you. So I would recommend, using the tool over the course of the next few weeks, and then we can get back together and do kind of like a follow-up training to go over some more specific things and address, any of your questions that correlate with your specific documents.
Dan, can you just show the folks where to go for support in the meantime too, please, real quick?
Yeah, in the bottom left corner, there is a help button, and this will pop up for you like this little help widget. This contains our end user guide. So again, we can't cover everything in an hour, of course. So if there's like a simple how-to type of question, we have an end user guide, which is really extensive. You don't have to read this cover to cover unless you're a real bookworm and you like reading. It's pretty long and pretty dense, but you can also like just, control F and like keyword search if you want to find like a specific section that might relate to, some topic that you forgot how to do, or something that we might have not had a chance to cover yet. There's a lot of information inside of that user guide. It will pop out to a separate window if you hit this little square button. And then alternatively, you can submit a support ticket. So type in your name, your email address, and a general subject. And if you have like this description field here, what's really helpful is if you can literally take the URL of the page that you're working on and paste it into the description field, and then give us, whatever sort of synopsis of what you're experiencing. This will help our support team kind of immediately pinpoint the issue that you're having and get back to you in a shorter amount of time. If you just say something in general, like having a problem with a table, well, the number of users and documents that you guys are going to have going into your account, it really leaves our support team kind of scratching their heads, because you might literally have thousands of tables in your account. So let us know like what specific page you're struggling with, and then they'll be able to immediately address whatever question or issue you're having. So give us the description, the URL of the page, and then whatever sort of write-up you have, like if you have any information about it. So that's and then you hit the send button. So pretty straightforward process.
All right, well, we will send the recording over to Brooke, and we'll kind of call out where some of these things were after the 3 o'clock hour started, and follow up with some of the answers to, I think Tiffany's questions was the only one that we need to follow up on, and we'll look forward to meeting you all for the second training, I think next week.
Okay, question about the second training. What will that include?
So that will either include, actually, that's a good question for Brooke. If everyone's going to have a chance to use it over the next week or so, and kind of come in with armed and ready with questions and feedback and sort of troubleshooting things or streamlining things for you, or if it's going to be an entirely new group of users that are seeing it for the first time, and it might just be a review. So is Brooke still on the call?
Don't think
No.
so.
Okay.
Originally, it was supposed to be the former.
Okay, so if we can't attend, you will still have a recording of that then, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, and then we should contact Brooke for the recording?
Yes.
Okay, Thank you.
I'll send her the recording of this and some of the answers to the questions just to make sure, she can disperse it to everybody.
Great. Thank you.